very much in the same way that on the previous video I was talking about the ability to have perspective, raising yourself up, considering from that higher place whether or not the things that you are struggling to obtain are actually being kept at arm's length through the perceptions and the worldviews that you hold to be true, by questioning those things and inquiring into whether or not their reality has any valid place in your life based on what you want. I have to acknowledge that perspective is something which is constantly changing, and whilst we can ascend the metaphorical staircase of awareness, from time to time we also descend back into the realms of ignorance. And ignorance is a word not many people, I think, will use willingly. But by that I just mean unawareness. I mean, for everything that we come to realize, there is also the possibility that we can lose sight of it. And so we might be able to place ourselves in a perspective of being deserving or worthy or capable, or it being completely natural for us to have a loving, kind, understanding relationship. But at the same time, we can find ourselves in that relationship and have moments where it's very difficult for us to receive the love of our partner because for some reason it feels awkward or it feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like we're worthy or deserving of that for whatever reason. And the reason is irrelevant. And I know there's a lot talked about in many ways, to look back in our past and to find out where these things come from so that we can do something about it. But the reality is the past doesn't exist. What you're working with now is what you're working with now. It's not what you're going to be working with tomorrow, and it wasn't what you were working with yesterday. So if you attend to the needs of this moment, you have an opportunity to better tend to the needs of the next moment. And if what you have in this moment is discomfort, then that's what you're working with. That's your fuel for moving forward. That's your invitation for change. Trying to force change isn't going to make a difference. Trying to force change will only fuel the fire in ways which serve to burn you in the long term and will be undesirable in terms of the outcomes. And that it's in those moments when we try to change our circumstances because we think that that's what's going to make us feel better. But again, the reality is if we're in a place that we don't like the feeling of, then it's the feeling that's bothering us. It's not necessarily the situation, because the situation didn't bother us previously and it may not bother us in the next moment. So as human beings, we lose sight of this frequently. I'm no exception to that. And there are moments when everything around me seems to be going quite swimmingly, and then the next moment nothing really has changed fundamentally, but I'm worried, or I'm anxious, or I'm frustrated, or I'm irritated at something. And first thing I want to do is ask myself why, but that never yields a very constructive answer. The why is, well, because that's just how I feel. Because in that moment, my ability to see clearly has been obstructed. Similarly, as we're walking down this path here, you can see that the further down the path we go, the less visibility there is of the landscape. It doesn't mean that the landscape doesn't exist, it just means that we can't see it in its fullness. But the value of being able to see from that expanded perspective, well, that's the value of working on oneself, because when you work on yourself, it doesn't necessarily stop you from having moments where awareness appears to be obscured by certain things, or moments of hardship. But it creates an understanding beneath that, which is that no matter how hard things get, you know that they'll always improve. You know that they have the capacity to improve. It puts everything into a relative perspective, and nothing then is seen as absolute. And that's so important. It's so important because when we mistake something which is relative for something which is absolute, then we start to look at life as fixed, and all we can do in those moments is react or feel in some way as if we're being inconvenienced by life, and that's when we tend to become victims. And I don't think anyone consciously wants to be a victim of life, but to be a creator of life, to be empowered, to be able to step into this place where you are aware that you have influence over your life, you have influence over how you feel and the perspectives you hold. It doesn't necessarily come easily, but surely it's worth considering to know that this expanded perspective can bring some relief to those moments of doubt or suffering, to know that this expanded perspective can bring you closer to allowing the things that you truly want into your life without feeling guilty or feeling undeserving in some way. That's the value of perspective. And even if nothing changes instantaneously, it doesn't bother you because your experience has changed. And isn't that really what's important? Are we not all looking for a better experience, better quality experience? And we only find that when we give ourselves permission to look. Most people only give themselves permission to look when they've suffered enough. But you don't need to suffer to change the quality of your life. It doesn't mean that you're ungrateful with the way that things are. It just means that you're curious about what could be behind the curtain, what could come next, what else exists out there. And just because you want to ascend the hill, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with being at the bottom. It just gives you an expanded perspective of what's truly around.